Okay. Cool. Then let's do introductions. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I'll be chairing this round. I prefer she or her pronouns, but just refer to the panel as a whole, and I'll let my panelists introduce themselves in the order they appear on tab, starting with Devashish.
Hi, Devashish here. Prefer pronouns are he and they. All the best.
Hi, my name's Ethan, he, him, they, but address the panel as a whole.
Hi, Lauren, they, them, please. Congratulations and good luck.
Hi, Vasily, he, him. Good luck to everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, panel. Let's do team introductions. Please also indicate speaking order, starting with OG.
Hi, my name is Jan. I use he, him pronouns. They'll be speaking first.
Clara speaking second.
Thank you. OO.
Alex speaking first, here are they. Second, here are they.
Oh, thank you. CG.
Tejas speaking second, he, him. Good luck, everyone.
Tejas is speaking first. I'm speaking second. Not sure why you said that. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm tired.
Okay, Tejas, then Max. Thank you. And CO.
Taha Iqbal speaking first, no preferences. Taha Masood speaking second, he, him preferences.
Okay, amazing. So with all of that being done, good luck everyone. And to start the debate, very proud to call the Prime Minister.
Okay, am I visible and audible for everybody in the room?
Yep.
Great. If that's so, I'll be starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's start with clearly setting up the comparative. How does the status quo, like the world of how to defend look like? A, sex is much more casual. This means that you can have it with a lot of people. You can experiment. You can do different things. Like you can try in different places with like different partners. Different things, etc., etc. You can have it much more often. You can like there's no basic boundaries on that. You can also like try it with many more different people. We would compare that a bit to like playing tennis or cooking with like somebody. It doesn't have to be that deep. I mean, you can still do that like with many people. You can experiment and experiment with that and so on and so forth. How like speciality looks like. A, we believe that it's much more unique. It's much more like a special occasion, which means that it happens much less, maybe less often, but you care about it much more. You think about it much more. You have it with like less partners. It has to be the right person. You have to know that you love this person, that you like have certain emotions. It has to be under the right circumstances. You have to be happy. The other person has to be happy. The other person has to be happy, and basically it's also romanticized as it's connected with love. It's connected with this one special moment that you have with this right person in this beautiful state of emotions. Notice that even if in both worlds we have massive disproportions of like force between men and women, on our side men like search for less hookups, for less accidental sex. This means that this narrative also spreads through them. There's also like a change of what we promote, and I'll expand on that later on. Panel, let's have a quick preemption. Even if you have the desire to do that, you can still like fulfill like your desire for physicality in like different ways. You can watch a movie, you can do sports to also like give you dopamine, but on a much healthier level. You can have like conversations with the other person. We don't believe that this is the only thing that you can have to like have pleasure or basically be fulfilled in your life. On our side of the house, 3 cases. A, less societal pressure. Panel, notice how on our side, you can say that you're waiting for this right special person. You can say that you're waiting for this right special moment because it's so important for you. Panel, notice that also it is like all of those things are super subjective. Special means different for everybody else. And at the end of the day, it is super hard to judge that. We believe that I don't know what's like special for my friend, etc., etc. But on the comparative, there's pressure to do so because like a normal activity that just brings pleasure. It's just said that's that's something you should do, and that is something that you should do. That is like okay, and this is like pushed upon and like pleasure. So why aren't you doing that or things like that? 2 impacts from this. A, we believe that this pressure can be horrible. At the end of the day, this is pressure on people who are not ready, who do not want that, like putting like immense basically stress on them in a situation that they shouldn't be stressed, but they should enjoy. Secondly, we believe that doing it like wrong for the first time is super bad because like if you do it wrong for the first time, it determines like your sexual life for the the years to come. Because if you have pain, if you have shame inside of you, you're much less apprehensive to it. You're scared of it. You're not taking pleasure from this beautiful part of your life that on our side of the house you can simply have. Second case, we believe that sex is simply important. A, you can get pregnant. This is a huge impact for you. Secondly, it changes how your bodies operate. It changes like how you feel about a certain person, how you feel with yourself, how your organism works, what hormones are in your brain. Thirdly, we believe that at the end of the day, if you just simply think that, oh, jumping, like pushing yourself harder has to stop at some point. You can't do all of those things. There's like certain limits after what like experiences you can have. If you are in a loop of just trying to get more pleasure, more dopamine because of like the number of times you are in a, like you have sex or like how you have sex, at the end of the day, it has to stop, which is a huge barrier. On our side of the house, you can have much more value. Even if we have less sexual relations, like not as weird experimental things, then at least we can have pleasure from it and we can have much more stability. We can think about it much more. We can think about who are we like doing it with. If like, for example, pregnancy is a potential harm or not, how will this look like? But thirdly, we believe that this like narrative changes hugely like the disproportion between men and women. Notice that women are like often face many horrible things like with regard to sex. They face catcalling, aggressive like flirtation, or like uncomfortable comments that like are sexually basically objectifying them, which is super horrible. Panel, in this case, we're not saying that, for example, rape would not exist. We believe that people who are horrible exist on both sides of the house. They should be criminally prosecuted, but we say that all of those things happen to a much lesser extent. Why? We believe that in status quo, being aggressive is actually promoted because you are like trying to get as much often like males think that is like are trying to get as much sex as possible because this is simply pleasures for them. There's always like promoted like this toxic masculinity basically narrative that is going around. So it's even glorified for men to, for example, be aggressive in how they flirt and try to like get relationships. Notice also that people don't care, for example, about how the other person feels. It's just about fulfilling your pleasures, just about like getting all of those things. So even if the other person, for example, doesn't like the way that a man is flirting with them, especially women who like is this like much weaker and in societal norms perceived as such, men simply don't care. But on the comparative A, you don't have like this pressure to have as much sex, so you don't have like as many men pushing to have it in such aggressive ways. Secondly, if it's romanticized, then we believe that the men would care much more about the woman. So they would care for the woman to feel good, because in order to have like this romanticized version of it, the woman needs to be happy, the woman needs to like be consenting, actually happy and like, you know, enthusiastic about it. So what changes is that you much more try to get consent. You much more try to try to basically make the other person happy. So you probably don't like if the other person is clearly like scared because of your aggression flirtation, then probably you don't do that and you like stop doing that at some point, or you simply like nobody wants it. And thirdly, we believe that there's no romanticization of getting as much of it as possible. There's no like this weird narrative about like toxic masculinity that, oh, in order to be masculine, you need to have sex with numerous women and you need to be like this big macho in order to, you know, get as many girls as possible, because at the end of the day, it's much more about feelings, it's much more about speciality, and not simply about fulfilling this act and getting as many women as possible. We believe that the impact from this is huge. Notice how many women are scared. Notice how many women, like for example, in situations where they should enjoy themselves, in bars, in like social settings, have to fear basically for their safety, have to have like their time that's supposed to be good for them destroyed because of aggressive men going towards them. Secondly, we believe that at the end of the day, there are many gray situations where maybe women doesn't clearly disconsent, but is not happy. On our side of the house, she much clearly can decide whether she wants to be in a relationship or not. She can like set the boundaries much more clearly, because often like women are even afraid in the first place to say no to men if they are aggressive. And on our side of the house, it's much more possible, leaving women to have many more choices of like partners, of bodily autonomy over themselves. And as we have said, sex has huge impact on you, huge impact on how people perceive you. So giving women this autonomy is so important, because it influences how they live, how their bodies operate, and whether they are pregnant or not to an extent.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. And to continue, very proud to call leader of opposition.
My partner just went to the bathroom, so I'll wait 30 more seconds for them.
No problem.
Peer-wise in the chat, please. Firstly, a few responses to the Prime Minister's speech. Firstly, when setting up the comparative, what they say is that special sex is unique and targets the happiness of both partners. I don't think this is the actual comparative, because sex being viewed as special doesn't have to mean both partners are happy special. It can be, for example, it is special because it is a necessity to do things like make kids, and it is the ability to make kids which make sex special, which oftentimes crowds out queer individuals from being able to access morally legitimate forms of sex within society, sometimes even outlawed forms of sex. Or it might be seen as special because it is a way for the wife to pay service to her husband, and is a special rarity that he gets as a the important notion here is that special doesn't guarantee the happiness of both partners, so do not let them get away with this. Secondly, they say there is less pressure for sex to happen. Firstly, I'm not sure why there is more pressure for sex to happen on our side. When it is viewed as ordinary, that doesn't mean that like your friends are suddenly like everyone's telling you, you should like have more sex all the time. That's not how people usually work, right? More so, I would imagine it probably looks like the absence of shame or the absence of pressure to not have sex, which is to say, before you had this shift, like before the sexual revolution and all that, people would be shamed by their friends for telling them about the fact that they were having sex. And I would say when it's seen as ordinary, you just remove that shame. I don't think they can check level anyone pressures their friend to have more sex. Secondly, though, they then say then that you feel wrong when you are trying it for the first time and it goes wrong. I would actually say this is much worse on their side. Why? Firstly, because when sex is viewed as special, there is pressure to make sure that you have your special first time, which oftentimes means that people are way more stressed about that first time happening, the consequence of that. But also, secondly, due to the high expectations that were set up from your belief that it is special and especially your first time should be special, people are then quite ashamed or feel guilty when the first time doesn't go as planned. This is especially important for women because in the context of sex being special, you very rarely touch on all the details because it is not viewed as something that ought to be discussed or something that is non-taboo. Hence, there is very little information about the level of discomfort or pain that you can feel. And then oftentimes women internalize that and think that something is wrong with themselves when the first time they say that you can think about the drawbacks of sex more on their side. I think that you can think about drawbacks way more when you believe that sex is ordinary. Why? Because when it is special, you oftentimes get a picturesque narrative about it being like romanticized for you to even be able to have the narrative that it is special, right? So maybe it is like a beautiful thing between like a man and a woman to make kids or something like that. The problem then is that when you have this limited amount of both data points within media to represent this, but also the incentive to make it picturesque, to make sure that the idea of it being special is maintained, then that's when you get no representation of all the bad things that can happen during sex. And that's when people are uneducated. That's when you get pregnancies and things like that. Whereas comparatively, I would say on our side, there is more pressure on the state to do things like offer help like contraception or sex ed courses, because people are aware that this is something that most people do. And the state can no longer tell people, well, sex is special, so you should only do it if you're educated about this and all that, right? Lastly, they say you get more consent on their side. I would say, firstly, they actually get this less because with the picturesque idea of sex, it's oftentimes rooted in your ability to communicate through your bodies and whatnot. It's only when you acknowledge that sex is an ordinary thing and can go wrong in many instances that you actually start pushing for more communication to happen during sex. Secondly, women are more afraid to say no on their side because it is on their side that they are being perceived as ruining something special. So we actually flip this, and there is less of this on their side. One argument then on how you get better sex. 5 mechanisms. Firstly, sex is more frequent on our side. This means 2 things. A, you get more partners or just more instances of sex to learn from. That is to say, you learn that maybe different partners have different preferences and a lot of things are about communication, or you learn different techniques like the hand on the belly or the pillow, the stuff. Secondly, though, you will also learn more about your own preferences as you're having more sex, which is to say you maybe realize there's this one thing that you really like, and without it, sex wasn't so good. But the fact that you've had it more means that you were able to discover that, and after that, you're able to have much better sex. The second mechanism is that sex becomes less taboo, because once it's no longer special, it is something that you can talk about. It becomes a discussion amongst your friends. What does this mean? This means, A, it's something that people in relationships are now more okay to openly discuss, because they are aware that it is just like a material pleasure as any other, and they are both aware, or more people if it's a polyamorous thing, that they can cater it that everyone's preferences are satisfied, because it's nothing more than that. But it also probably looks like parents are likely to talk to their kids about sex, because it not being as special means that it's no longer such a difficult and heavy topic to talk about, but it also means like probably more sex education, you talking about sex on social media or with your friends, and overall more people being aware of like how to make good sex, but also safe sex. Third mechanism is that there is less guilt. Before I continue, CG, do you have anything? No. Okay. Why is there then less guilt? Because you will feel that you are not like ruining something special, or that you're not giving something special away to a wrong person. This means that A, people who engage in sex themselves feel less internal shame when they do so, which means they can enjoy that sex a lot more. But B, it also means there's less shame coming from society on people who had sex. And this is especially important in cases of sexual assault, where oftentimes in very conservative societies, you blame the woman for being assaulted, because not only was it like, you know, maybe her fault, but also she ruined something special that she should have saved for her husband by this happening to her. And that's when you get no fucking support to sexual assault victims. And that's the most important thing. Fourth mechanism is that you have a greater acceptance of a variety over time, of different forms of sex on our side. Because when it is special, you oftentimes feel that there is something like esoteric or religiously or essentially important about that specific notion of sex. Because when homophobic societies do things like outlaw gay sex, because they're ruining something that is special. It doesn't mean homophobia goes away on our side, but we're more likely to see more kind of toned down versions of homophobia, which says essentially do what you want in your own home, but not on the street, which is better than like actually gay sex being outlawed and people like invading your privacy all the time. Lastly, it's hard to manipulate people to do something against their will, because when sex is no longer special, it's clearly something that you do for your own material pleasure, so you don't need to do something that you don't like. The impact aren't that sex is more enjoyable, but also that you have more safe sex, with education and conversations, opening of sexual clinics, or a greater willingness to fund contraceptive methods from the state. For all of those reasons,
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Prime Minister. Woo.
All right, POI is in the chat. CEO, I see you. I will ask you when I will be ready. All right, I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I think it's unlikely that special will be framed at necessity to make kids. Couple of reasons for that. A, the diversity of people and queer people will exist on both sides of the house. B, the environmental stuff and how you're afraid to have kids and you don't want to bring them to this bad world will still exist. So it's unlikely that on either side of the house, it will be only associated with having a kids. Second of all, about the pressure and the norm of having a lot of sex. I think sex is associated with physical attributes, right? You're connecting this to the beauty standards, you frame in the marketing, and if you're saying that this is common, that this is something casual, you're also looking for someone who will be the top person to want to rank, because you want to outrank the other people, or also who is the desirable one. And therefore, I think it's way harder to target the audience and telling you what is special if you don't know anyone's personal preferences. If you don't have a time to target and to check what the other person's preferences are, what kind of mental connection they value, or what kind of thing they prioritize in their relationship. Therefore, I think this pressure, which not coming necessarily from your peers, right, but from the society as a whole, from the media, it's something which is way harder on side of the opposition, when it's something which you encourage people to do, something which you advertise, which you are seeing in every single movie, which you are seeing in the clubs, at the parties. Also, if they are saying that special it's harder to achieve because you have higher expectation, you're also looking for different specials, right? You're looking for a different type of entertainment. Maybe you hanging out with your male friends more, maybe you just hugging, maybe you going to the theater, maybe you going to watch movies, maybe you play sport together, you are getting the dopamine in a different form. And you know that there will be some high reward if you will meet this special person, which you will dedicate yourself, and therefore they will be maybe less likely to judge you based on the societal standards and maybe not ruin your first time experience. Then in terms of feeling guilty or like learning from your partners, but who are your partners? What kind of authority or what kind of knowledge they already have about you only because they had multiple different parties? This is your body autonomy. This is something which no one else saw most likely. This is something which you are highly attached to, and you don't want to get feedback or you don't want to learn from the other people. Comparatively, if something is special, if you are waiting for this, you're presumably picking the different priorities on this connection, right? Presumably you are developing a different bond in that relation. But also, second of all, what Jan told you, it was unresponded. If you have bad experience in the first place in the casual sex, you are unlikely to jump into the second one, right? Because what's the possibility that you will be much better? You're still dealing with internal shame. You're still feeling withdrawal. You feel that someone is judging you based on your body and connecting that to your personality, which means that you're losing your self-esteem, which means that you're less likely to continue being yourself, which I think is necessarily problematic. Another case from opening opposition is that there will be more pressure for state to offer contraception. I'm sorry, but we live in the world where the sex is perceived as a casual in many societies. It didn't necessarily work that the state is offering you contraception or adequate education, specifically when you have competing interests and when you are inputting for a lot of young men and for a lot of people that this is something which you should do, that this is something which you should follow through. And I think it immensely harms men in terms of how women perceiving them, because the biggest threat and the biggest difference between men and the women is that the men have a penis and that they can hurt you or that they can use it against you. When you kind of changing the norms in terms of what is approachable, that this is a special, that you're expecting a little bit more work being done, that you expect someone to gain trust, that you expect more chivalry, that you expect more respect or more work being spent on this one person to show that you're actually taking care of more than just a short-term pleasure. I think therefore you have less incentive to push men away and to discriminate them or being afraid of them, and you have more collaboration between men and women, specifically because I think sex is a massive barrier in order to stop the inequality and the bad relation between them. And then they're talking about having like a better sex. I'm not sure what's the value, right? They never gave you one unique thing which having more sex or having frequent sex giving you, because I think there are a lot of people who are asexual or who are not hooking up or who don't have sex for a long time. They still can be happy. They can still find different form of enjoyment, sometimes more healthy, sometimes the one which have less consequences for your life. And here I want to talk as well about the parent and children relationship. I think when you are a parent and when you are seeing the word that this is something casual and common, but you think in the long term about the consequences. If my daughter will get pregnant, I need to take care about her financial situation. She will be shamed by the society. She might be left alone. Her body will change. You are way more protective and you are having more generational conflict between parents and the children, because you know that if they will leave the house, they might meet someone, they might go and have sex, which might have the long-term consequences for them. But because children sometimes have optimism bias, and you think, oh, no, it will not happen to me, or taking information from their peers who are not the experts in the field. Therefore, the parents have less trust to their children because this is something which is predominantly in their minds, right? You are more afraid. Comparatively, if something is special, you are more likely to discover the special for a longer period of time. You are trying to define what makes special for you. Maybe it's about the intellectual connection. Maybe it's about the person who's seeking more close to you. Maybe it's more friends to lovers relation. But this seems something more healthy, something more acceptable by someone which have less risk, specifically because people are more likely to wait for the special, even if they will be later a bit disappointed. We can take this burden on us. Before I move on, CEO.
Do you think that norms around sex are better in the developing world, where sex is largely seen as something sacred or special, or in the liberal world, where it's seen as an anodyne thing that two people can get up to at any time?
Yeah, but on your side of the house, it's connected to many different norms, right? It's connected to the social status. It's connected and very like a geographically specific, right? Because you want to advance socially or because you have some conservative values from the past. Because this house prefers world motion. It's changing both developing and developed world at the same time. And I don't think that you can specialize these cases. But also, now let's talk about the impacting what's happening on our side of the house. I think it's better for women on our side of the house because you have a more respect, you have a less pushy behavior from the other side, which is being socialized from the very young age, showing that you are the dominant, that you are the help provider, that you are like a bread breeder, that you are the person who is the dominant in this relation, so you are more likely to impose the pressure. If it's special, you need this other person to perceive you as a special as well. You want to be the person who will win it. You want to be the person who will get the reward, so you are changing your approach a little bit. Second of all, better for men because you are no longer perceived as a threat, and it's changing the norms how you're approaching the sex, and we think that it's decreasing the biggest conflict which is between the generation. For the younger people, you are not jumping into the things which you are not ready, which is stopping you from better experiencing later. Better for the relationship. Like sex, let's support opening government.
Hey, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Leader of Opposition. Woo.
Hello, am I audible? Oh, sick. Okay. I'll take a POI out loud because I cannot see the chat at all. So yeah, I will take one from CG if they can offer me one. If they don't, then I'll take one from opening government. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want to first note how you internalize sex, because note, just as OG say, there are just many forms of enjoyment that are seen as ordinary in the status quo, eating, playing tennis, or playing video games. But I think people still develop unique relationship with these actions. You have foodies, or people think there's something especially emotional about music they care about in a very different way to others. I think what happens on our side is I think you develop an individual relationship with sex, but you're also far more accepting of other people's individual relationship towards it too. Because comparatively, when you were told that sex is something special, that it's a conjoining of the body, that it's holy to some degree, the harm that occurs for this dissonance and when you don't actually relate to the experience is huge. It's people feeling disconnected from their body when they don't get the crazy sort of enjoyment that Gov says may come, when people don't feel that sense of love and connection with their God or with their partner because procreation is just what they thought it'd be. But it also accounts for people who really enjoy sex, right? Because if you wish to have sex with multiple people, or you want to have it more frequently than your society permits you to tell you should, you feel internally disgusted with yourself. You feel like your desires are something that are out of your control. And the more special it is, the greater level of disconnect you feel from your own desires. You feel more disconnected from your own fucking body because it feels entirely separate to what you think you should be wanting, whereas what is actually wanting. Comparatively, I think what has opened up is just a variety and acceptance of different views. And it means not only do you have a wider variety of views, but you're able to opt into the specific relationship to sex that you hold. Because now there are stories, songs, people who are talking about things in the same way you do because the open conversation, this just we're open. And so we're able to get this special relationship with people who want this special relationship. And this is implicitly responds to the vast portion of OG argument, because you just actively reduce and accept the variety of beliefs much more. Even if certain people want to have a special time or want to have their one specific partner if they want to, they're just able to do this, right? Because you're significantly more able to just say, I don't want to have sex with you because it's something special to me, and the other person doesn't see it as something weird because that is also accepted. I think you just have a much more nuanced conception towards this. They say that then this oppresses one because it starts levels of narratives around this. I want to flip this argument, because the people who get primary control over who decides what special means are men, and this means they control the narrative, and this is where pressuring begins to exist, because people still wanted to have sex on their side of the house. This is why conservative societies still go to fucking brothels and black markets still exist. This is why conservative men cheat on their wives while talking about the values of abstinence. I would say the capacity to control the behavior of women and their bodies is able to be done when you're able to legislate and supply narratives of what people should do with their bodies. What people do in their confines in their own homes on government sides is a moral claim that they're then able to legislate and make specific narratives over. Comparatively, I think you're just less able to do this, right? And it means it's just one less form of oppression people are able to apply onto others. They say this harms men because people make fun of you for a small dick. Like one, skill issue. Secondly, I think this collaboration just occurs when these communications about sex occurs more in civil society. So sure, if it's self-esteem you care about and how people regard themselves, I think when people are more willing to come out about their bad experiences, more people are then able to benefit off this, and the stories are able to come out of this. I think it also means when kids still like want to have sex, they're able to talk to their parents about it. They're able to open up to the point of being like, I think these are things that I'm wanting to have. Parents have these conversations at a much earlier age. This just means you get the significant lowered levels of harms that everything opening government talks about, because all the harms that occurs out of sex are specifically things that are able to be moved away. This is the point of which you're able to incentivize to fund things such as contraception. Societies like probably find out that sheep's insides are good ways to stop people impregnating others from just a much smaller way. It means that these things are just not only more available and accessible to a wide majority of people, but the usage of these things is openly accepted. Like, note, the Catholic Church said that contraception was a sin for literally hundreds of years, right? I think at the point at which these are the sorts of narratives that are able to be questioned against, and people are just able to have sex inside their own homes, the risk of the harms of sex actively decreases, and I think you're just able to enjoy it more. Let's go into the weighing of what Alex provides. Firstly, a faster progression of greater acceptance of a variety of thoughts and sexualities. And we're not going to be unnuanced, because there are probably other ways to oppress people and probably other ways to find things icky. But the difference is, when you see two guys having sex on their side of the house, this is something that you see that determines them to hell. This is something which you see that poisons the mind of the child. But notably, at the point at which you do not see it like that, this is the point at which you're willing to move away and accept the philosophy of, just let people do what they want to do. It's also the point at which you feel a lot less disgusted by the concept of gay sex, because, like, I know more guys get pegged on our side of the house, so they're able to see why people enjoy this more. Notably, this is an argument that needs to be actively flipped. Any degree of mitigation just mitigates what they're able to get this progression occurring in 100 years at 10. But any progression is good. When two women are able to feel more comfortable in this and don't think they're going to hell, I think that's fantastic, whether it happens in the year 2000, whether it happens in the year 1900. And Gov side, I think it happens far later. Secondly, the utility of good sex. I know debaters like love utility weighing, and what's more utilitarian than like hedonism? And this is silly, but sex is just quite good. And if this is every person in every relationship and every hookup for the entirety of human history that is just occurring more, this is the amount of people who can access this specific sort of utility comes about to a faster degree. And governments say, but you like don't see the utility of sex. I've explained to it. The utility of sex is something that people are willing to take the trade-off for. When you have oppressive regimes, people still fuck. When people are like have a relationship, they're unmarried, they're willing to risk their entire family's lives. People are genuinely willing to risk their entire lives and their previous relationships and their concept of self they have built up to have sex with someone else. I think this is just a good joy that people do get large amounts of enjoyment of, and at the point at which more people are able to have it to a better degree and feel less shame for it, I think we're able to access this utility. So even if government do provide any substantial harm, they have to weigh against the utility of everyone having good sex. I'll take a PY from closing government. Dabney.
Patriarchal societies have a constant interest in holding down women's social and economic position. That means even without. Sorry, I
just repeated PY.
Okay. Yeah, patriarchy has a constant interest in existing, even without a narrative that a woman had allowed herself to have unspecial sex. She'd be criticized for something else, like being too emotional. It just gets precisely flipped in those societies.
Yeah, we implicitly respond to this. Oh, could you? We implicitly respond to this at the point at which I just say, like, this is a like mitigation trade-off. You just have one lesser form of control. And this gets into the final weighing. I think you have greater ownership over your own body and your own preferences. I want to note that the way in which you experience the world and the way in which you then form your own emotions and ideas are prerequisited by how you see yourself and the relationship your own body has with the rest of society. And when you do feel desire out of something that society says that you shouldn't feel desire out of, or when you feel the need to go do something, this is when you feel internally disgusted and get large amounts of harms. Like this is the point at which people who feel like they have like a sexual desires for a guy in homosexual and a homophobic societies feel internally disgusted and leads to higher rates of like suicide or harm of these things occurring. I think regardless of anything else in this debate, people feeling as if they have a greater ownership of their own body and their own autonomies makes people feel as if they just have better control in their own lives and their ability of just having to live it going forward. And even if it's only just in the sexual aspect, even if it's only when you're horny, I think it's just a better avenue for people to be able to just have autonomy and freedom of expression and choice. Clear opening opposition.
Hey, we thank the speaker for that speech and the entire first half of the debate. To continue, very proud to call a member of government.
Can you hear me? Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. Shit, sorry. Liz, can I borrow your phone? Sorry, my phone literally is dead. Okay. 3 points of framing that marginalize opening opposition. 1. Sex being taboo remains largely symmetric, it just takes a different form. Rather than sex being taboo being used to control women's sexual activities, there are often other ways to control women from engaging in sex. For example, in the broad history of human history, you shift to narratives like, we need to prevent women from having kids too early, from being pregnant, from threatening their health, from having kids they are not prepared to raise outside the confines of a marriage that is best for raising kids. We need to prevent women from having a romantic partner who is too early, from a different ethnic group, from a different caste or class. All of these are strong narratives that allow societies to control the behavior of women and how they seek out sex that aren't tied to the act of sex itself being special. What that means is, insofar as patriarchal norms are symmetric on both sides of this debate, the ability to use patriarchal norms to control women and their actions remains symmetric. Changing the taboo around sex does not substantially reduce the margin of how much you are able to control women. Second, it's worth noting, opening opposition says the narrative in which sex is seen as special is controlled by men. The narrative of ordinariness is also controlled by men. So the notion that sex is ordinary isn't likely, as opening opposition claims, to lead to a view of sex that is entirely based on freedom and people can do whatever they want. Rather, if men weaponize social narratives on either side, they will likely weaponize the narrative of ordinariness to say sex being ordinary means you should have it all the time, means you are abnormal for not having it all the time because you are refusing to participate in an action that is ordinary, as men say, this is something I want, this is something I want to impose on women as well. But third, internal disgust and cognitive dissonance, if people feel like the narrative of sex doesn't align with them, is symmetric as well, which is, if sex feels different to you for some reason, if it feels more intimate, if you don't want to have sex with a bunch of different people because, you just find that one partner is better for you in terms of how you have sex, that is viewed by society as you treating sex as special rather than seeing it as ordinary. That makes you feel like you are contradicting what you have learned about sex, what sex felt like to you. So you can have cognitive dissonance either way. In a world where it is seen as special, as opening opposition points out, seeing it as ordinary, liking more sex can make you feel cognitive dissonance. But in a world where it's seen as ordinary, seeing it as less ordinary than other people do can also lead to cognitive dissonance. So opening opposition's case is overwhelmingly symmetric. They do not explain why one narrative is more likely to lead to their harms than others. In light of that, I have 2 contributions out of closing government. One, why substantially more casual sex, quite simply, is harmful to people, even if they are not pressured into it. Even if they think they are ready into it and are making this option for themselves, it is quite literally harmful to people. But second, I'm going to better mechanize opening government's argument on sexual coercion and sexual violence. Because opening government makes the argument in terms of men are really toxically masculine. But as opening opposition points out, you can view sex as special potentially while men still act in toxically masculine ways. I'll explain why this narrative is critical to protect people from sexual violence anyway. Firstly, why is substantially more casual sex harmful to people? Opening government focuses on people who are pressured into casual sex and can't escape that pressure by saying they are waiting for the right person. This argument applies in a much broader set of circumstances, where people who opt into casual sex even when they are older and mature, even in pressure-free environments, as opposition points out, have sex with substantially more people, substantially more often. We're just going to say, contrary opening opposition, this is actually bad for them. Note, opening opposition concedes sex is more frequent and with more partners. That structurally means it's more likely to be casual because it's hard to form emotional bonds with 300 different people. People have limited emotional capital. There is a lot more casual sex. In light of that, 5 reasons why casual sex simply makes people substantially more unhappy. 1, actually, your sex sex is worse when you don't view it as special or valuable. The belief that sex is special makes each individual sexual experience more special as well. You were taught that within the confines of a marriage, for example, the act of sex is an act of union granted to you by God if you're a religious person. You view the act of sex as something to look forward to, something other people around you have had, but you've been denied for a fair amount of time. You have substantial anticipation, and that anticipation builds the joy and meaning you can experience. Opening opposition says, what if this anticipation doesn't match reality? What if sex actually turns out to be a disappointment? But our argument is, whether sex is a disappointment or not is a function of what you believe it is. If ordinary actions of sex you are told throughout your life are special, are unique, that makes them more special and more unique to you, and you view them better. Second, having more partners and having less sex with a singular person is bad. Why? Because one, a singular person can learn about your preferences through experience. Experience with a singular person allows you to get to know each other, get better at the specific forms of sex that caters to your partner's preferences. Second, it increases trust. Even if sex remains ordinary, there are still elements of sex which substantially improve when you trust the other person. You're less scared that they will refuse to wear a condom so you won't get pregnant. People often have body image issues that are exogenous, so if they trust a person more when they're having sex with them, they are less worried about what this particular body part looks like while having sex, which makes the experience more positive for them. If you have sex with one person and experience intimacy with one person over and over again, you're much more likely to trust them, meaning this amount of fear does not materialize. But third, there are literally diminishing returns. Like if you have many more individual experiences of sex, the marginal value of each experience of sex makes you less happy, you get bored of it, it's less intimacy building. Third structural reason, it increases risks associated with sex. When you don't know the other person, when it's casual sex, you have to have sex with many different people. You don't have the time to think about them, to screen them, to interact with them, to spot red flags. Spending time with someone else is key to uncovering these things. This is important because there's an independent risk. What if the person does not respect a safe word? What if the person harasses you? High levels of casual sex also increase health risks. For example, you can't have the time to do things like STI screening, and the fact that you're having sex with many more people substantially increases the risk of sexually transmitted diseases, especially in history when treatments for diseases were much, much weaker. Healthcare infrastructure did not exist. You're going back in the beginning of time and encouraging this. Fourth, on both sides of this debate, people form emotional attachments with people whom they have sex with. This is because of an evolutionary incentive that sexual pleasure and intimacy is tied to forming emotional attachments, because that often leads to children, and evolution often optimizes for parents, and therefore emotional intimacy results in singular parents and stable households. Problem, if you form emotional attachments with someone, but they're having sex with other people, even if sex isn't special, you have jealousy because they're experiencing intimacy with other people. You don't get to experience them as much. They often leave you. You often never have sex with them again. That leaves you substantially unhappier. But finally, this also substantially protects you from sexual violence. Why? Because conservative norms are often necessary to build political capital for protections. The belief that sex is special, so people should be protected from having or experiencing too much sex, is often what causes universities to have things like anti-harassment policies, even if they emerge from conservative norms. This is critical. Happy to propose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call a member of opposition. Woo.
Can I be heard? Cool. I'll probably ask for a POI anyways, but I don't really look at the chat, so just please verbally interject if I don't take a POI. That's fine. Cool. Give me a second. Sex in CG's world is sort of like having your mom's chicken curry, I guess, which is, yes, your mom cooks it for you, you trust her to cook it well, you have a bond with the curry and you really like it. But the problem with that kind of sex is, what if the neighbor's mom's curry is much better? That's the problem with them, which is, yes, people might feel that that sex is great, but essentially in their world, you're duping yourself into believing that the sex is good as opposed to the sex actually being good for you. This probably means people lie to themselves about their partner's abilities all the time, which at some point is going to come to the fore. If you as a woman don't orgasm during sex for 5 years, it's probably going to lead to relationship issues. Cool. I will integrate rebuttal into this speech. I will basically talk about two broad norms that interact with this norm of special sex. because in norms-based, we generally do have norms interacting with each other, and just prove why on our side, we basically just don't face the same issues that OO does, that CG says they do, and still win the round. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of norms is just flag that conventional beauty standards probably exist in both sides of the house on either sense. But I would suggest that conventional beauty standards become a lot worse insofar as sex is seen as special. Because if sex is seen as special, then the partner that you are having it with is also seen as special, not just by you, but also by people outside. So people in society. So if sex is seen as casual, normal, and meaningless on our side of the house, people are likely to reduce their high standards for a partner, i.e. not look for the fittest guy out there or the hottest girl out there, but reduce their own standards and feel less worse about reducing their own standards. And people on the outside, conversely, are less likely to shame their friends or I can't actually believe you slept with that person or XYZ person, because everyone is having sex casually. So conventional beauty standards don't really come into sex because all sides also have conceded that people are probably having sex a lot more. What is the impact of people having sex a lot more, and how does this interact with conventional beauty standards? The first thing I would note is that there is a greater likelihood of people who do not have access to sex and are not conventionally attractive for having access to sex. I think that is just an advantage in and of itself. But if we go deeper into this impact, if people are not confident about the way that they look, have self-doubt, but still have access to sex, it allows them to not only feel better about themselves, i.e. I am wanted, I am desired, there is someone out there for me, but also prepares them for future relationships better, i.e. in their world, if these people are constantly being ignored because they don't fit into social norms of what conventional beauty looks like, then they do not have the confidence to approach other people to begin with because they already fear rejection to begin with. So I would posit that these people probably benefit a lot more. And panel, in terms of impact and the reason why this is important, I would suggest that the vast majority of people in the world do not fit into tight conventionally attractive standards anyways. Or secondly, even if they do fit into conventionally attractive standards, you would notice that they don't feel that they are pretty enough, which is why even people who are conventionally pretty probably get like plastic surgeries or whitening creams or dieting pills or so on and so forth. It is not just that the sex becomes better and they have access to more partners and better romantic relationships because they have confidence to reach out to people, but I would posit that they do not do shit that is harmful to themselves and is really bad for their lives. They do not suffer from mental health harms to the same degree that happens in their world as well. Does this happen in our world? Do people get ignored and still don't get access to sex? Probably. But on our side, there's a higher likelihood of these people having access to sex. The second thing I would note is for people on the other side of this equation, i.e. people who are perhaps pretty or conventionally attractive, the fact that they can have sex with people who are not conventionally attractive probably means that they also have access to partners who look different. Therefore, looks do not become an essential feature when you are selecting a partner, i.e. what if you happen to have sex with someone? And I would note having sex with someone is not just like entering into a room, having sex and then fucking off. It's probably you meet at the bar for drinks. You probably have conversations after sex. You maybe set up another date or whatnot. I would suggest that they probably have a better chance of finding better partners for themselves as opposed to limiting the pool of partners to conventionally attractive people who fit the perfect partner stereotype. Therefore, even they probably have better relationships or chances of better relationships on their side. The last point I would note is incels will probably exist on both sides of the house, but the likelihood for incels to exist on our side of the house and say vehemently toxic things about women who keep on rejecting men is much less likely on our side of the house, where women do not feel that they only need to have sex with the perfect man or the perfect woman or whatever. So while they will probably exist on our side of the house, we do not get this toxic online presence of incels bullying people to the same degree that these guys do. How is this different from opening? So our opening says, hey, look, people are shamed for having a lot of sex, i.e. people are slut shamed, or people are shamed for being like kinky or whatnot, or homosexual sex is taboo or whatnot. We are catering to not just these groups of people, but a wider majority of people, i.e. all people who feel that they are not conventionally attractive, and therefore the impact is a lot better. I would also note that this does not really fall into the same traps or the rebuttals that closing government says we will fall into, i.e. this does not really rely on the patriarchy or whatnot, or women will be controlled or whatnot. Conventional beauty standards will probably exist on both sides. This is better for men and better for women. I will take opening before I move on to the second piece of analysis.
People are more afraid to not be normal than they are afraid to not be special. On your side of the house, they are more pressured to fit to the other preferences, to have a sex, even if they don't desire that in the first place.
No, that's incorrect. People aren't afraid to be normal because there is no defining feature of normal, i.e., if people are pressured to being special, there are probably media narratives being thrust onto them or social religious narratives being thrust onto them of what special looks like. There is no what does normal look like for them to be pressured. All right, cool. Last bit of analysis, i.e., and this also interacts with like closing government stuff around like, oh, consent and sexual violence and whatnot. I would note that government benches on their side of the house have assumed that if you have special sex with a special person, both sides see each other as special people. What happens when you tell people that you need to have sex with a special partner and that is the only one that is your soulmate or whatever the fuck that is? But what happens when one of those partners does not recognize the other one as a soulmate? I would suggest that this is what lends to creepy behavior, like people stalking other people or harassing people or following people or not taking no for an answer because they have convinced themselves that this is only one and this is the only one we need to have sex with. I would suggest that while this will still happen probably on our side of the house, it happens a lot less because you have not attached the same level of importance to this person and you do not really have to have this issue with that person anyways. Lastly, I would just note that on the point of just people having better sex in general or experience, etc., people probably have a wider array of experiences and can find out what they like and what they don't like and what their preferences are, as opening off suggested. So lots of the case that side closing government has is already defunct. For all these reasons, very proud to oppose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call government week. Woo.
Can everyone hear me? I personally think we should take incels at their word. And one of their major complaints about modern society is that the attractive chads, the most attractive high status men, are taking up all of the most attractive women and having casual sex with them, leaving very few women left for them to get into relationships with. Incels are again motivated by political economy reasons. They're downtrodden, angry men who are likely to exist in any stratified, unequal society. And in fact, I think it seems substantially worse in a world where rather than them being encouraged to see women as special people and get into relationships, they become obsessed with a lack of casual sex. They understand that sex is ordinary in their world because the narrative is sex is ordinary, but then it's even worse that they're not getting any because this normal mundane thing is something that's not accessible to them as much. And that's an even worse stigma than not being able to access like some very important thing that you get later in life, but they literally are not accessing some baseline desire. If it's like, food or water, now they lack it. So I think it becomes substantially worse for that group of people. On beauty standards in general, though, I think that there's a degree of small marginal change on both sides for the initial reason that beauty standards are manufactured for economic reasons. Media has an incentive to propagate them in general because they reinforce existing social structures. Potentially, there's a margin on the claim from OP, which says that you want to seem more special and care about the partner and that you're more focused on what your partner actually thinks or believes. But the problem is that they just start the analysis here at the point when you're already in a relationship. You view sex as special, you want to find someone who you trust and actually like, you're more likely to select someone who doesn't reinforce terrible beauty standards on you in the first place. Second, you're just exposed to more people's judgment in their world, like being on a dating app and scrolling through lots of impersonal profiles who judge you based on quantitative metrics, like how many swipes that you get. Seeing lots of people who you view as higher status or more attractive than you also makes you want to be more like them. And the fact that you hear about a lot more sex happening in society because the taboo we're discussing is lesser means that the fact that other people who are more attractive and look a particular way are having a lot of sex becomes a lot more tangible to you compared to people being somewhat more modest and protected. Now on opening opposition, and before I go into weighing our case, I want to be clear on why a lot of their content is out beyond what Tej has said. There's some interesting material on the treatment of LGBT rights, but I think that there are countervailing narratives in our world. For instance, think about how powerful it was in America as an argument for why gay marriage should be illegal that actually convinced a lot of moderate people. Think about Barack Obama's change from 2008 to 2012, that sex is a right, that relationships are special, and that this is something that ought to be protected. It is not mundane, it is extremely politically important. It's an extremely important thing for your identity, for your relationships, to be like us. It is part of love and worth protecting. So that argument would have also existed more powerfully in a world where people are likely to respond to it and view gay sex as being special. But I also think in a world where, sex is viewed as ordinary, a religious conservative just sees gay people ordinarily having a lot of sex and degrading what they understand to be good about sex. So the difference does not seem very large in that case. State restrictions on sex would often exist to fulfill a particular social purpose. There was a religious objective that wanted to push women out of the economy, push them out of power, and that involved using shame, right? Saying that they were unbounded from relationship, that women couldn't own property, and those were all connected to their sexual romantic behavior. New narratives spring up to accomplish those ends because they exist dynamically. They exist to fulfill particular social purposes. The last thing from opening off that's unique is that you iteratively learn about your preferences more when it comes to sex. I think the problem here is that you're encountering a lot more individual sexual relationships. For the reasons Tejas observes, it's not likely that you keep a lot of long-term casual partners. A small percentage of the population in the first instance is polyamorous in the very first place. But also, even if you know your own preferences better, teaching someone the entire library of your preferences, which is often physical, often mechanical, and often relies on trust to be willing to share, like kinks and preferences, is going to happen a lot more slowly. And the likelihood is that you kind of have like basic default vanilla sex, or it plays into the phenomenon. Think about the women complaining in current society about men they hook up with being too rough with them in sex, or thinking that they buy into a particular conception of what good sex is because of the influence and normalization of media. Trust obviates that. It creates an iterative penalty to engaging in bad behavior during sex because you face that person next and not just a nightly hookup. And I think that there are reasons why people default to easy narratives when it comes to hookups, right? It's complicated and difficult to make yourself emotionally open, to go into the effort of getting into a relationship, to go into the effort, even if it's not a literal romantic relationship, just having one or two sexual partners whom you trust. That takes a lot of vulnerability from you emotionally. And so you default in a world where sex is ordinary. It's all too easy to default to making easy decisions about the person who comes up to you at the bar rather than more deeply interrogating your choices. So do you introspect in the way that Op says? I don't think so. On the political protection of sex and on the way that sexual violence manifests, I agree that there's a margin for Op here, which is that people feel worse about something being taken away from them or degraded. But I want to be very clear, one moment, that the protection of women in deeply conservative societies, think about rural India, for example, where there are deeply religious norms about sex, is often unfortunately tied to their sanctity. For instance, in contexts historically where women did not have legal rights to sue or pursue criminal penalties for rape, the way it was done was that it was considered a penalty against the man, a penalty against the father, that he had taken that thing. And so societies that are terrible towards women in general and are sexist and misogynistic find ways to protect sex as being special through the lens of misogyny, which is often a critical way why in the worst cases that have the most sexual violence that we even get laws that make rape illegal or that impose significant penalties in the first instance. Those are all more likely to happen on our side of the house. Before I go on,
You are correct that men can coerce women with both falsely made narratives about sex. The difference is that as women have more sex on our side, they start seeing through the false patriarchal narrative quicker.
I don't think that's necessarily true, because the environments where the claim is highest margin are the ones where society is like systematically sexist and there's lots of misogyny. Yes, sorry, there are like individually better men, but the question is, do people recognize this? Can you make that stick, right? People are devoted to casual sex. They're less likely to stay down with one individual partner. So can you actually keep your relationship with that person? Do you view yourself as worthy of being with that person? Those are all burdens that aren't met. On differentiation with opening government, I think the two largest missing links from opening government are, number one, why even if they prove that you're more likely to wait for the right person, they don't actually explain how you actually do find that right person. Tejas' argumentation about the way that people engage in self-discovery via sex, why sex itself creates internal trust within relationships, and all the reasons about why it makes the emotional bond between people actually feel better in a sort of self-sustaining way, as in, even if you are literally deceiving yourself about how sex is good because it creates utility. It's good because it makes you feel happy. And if that's convinced to people, then that's all well and good. So we actually identify the reasons why people do selection in ways that opening government doesn't. The second is that even if opening government proves that there's a manifestation of toxic masculinity in the way that ordinariness is pursued, as OO points out, this can happen in a lot of other ways on Op. They don't sufficiently respond there. Tejas' analysis actually does accomplish this. For that reason, we clearly weigh over opening gov. Proud to post.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to sum up the entire debate, very proud to call position with
Can I be heard? Wonderful. Starting in just a couple of moments. It's very curious that closing government tries to make the claim that rights can be extended better to LGBTQ peoples through making sex something special, given that this is historically not how rights have been accorded to people. In fact, it is because something is normal typically and mundane and so basically human that it is a right. I think, for instance, that drinking water is something that everybody would be considered to be a normal, natural right. And the desegregation of drinking water in apartheid societies, consequently, came not from valorizing the act of drinking water, but by just pointing out that it is a normal, fair human right that everybody should have equal and equitable access to. Similarly, we think sex and its translation across like discriminatory boundaries can only be achieved in a world where sex is seen as normal. Three things inside this speech. First of all, I'm going to attack closing government's extension on casual sex being harmful. Secondly, I'm going to prove to you why opening government is deeply confused about whether or not sex actually is or isn't special. And thirdly, I'm going to prove to you why our impact's way above the opening opposition. So first of all, closing government and whether or not casual sex is harmful, they have a few mechanisms here. Let's deal with each of them independently. First of all, they say the belief that sex is special makes it better, and they make up for analysis here by waving their hands around kind of aggressively. The problem here is physical technique does matter in sex, right? They've sort of hand waved this away by saying, well, it's the anticipation of the act. And my response is, it doesn't matter how much I anticipate a really bad meal. If the meal is not well prepared, I'm not going to like it. Consequently, the physical, mechanical part of sex, which is the actual physical stimulation you receive to your nervous system, is infinitely more important than the mental anticipation you might receive. So the belief that sex is special does not make it better. In fact, people getting better at the mechanics of sex likely makes it much better. Second, their claim is, well, you're likely to have better sex with one person, and in a world with casual sex, you're going to have sex with more people. True, but if we agree that you're going to have sex with one person and it's better, then it's very possible, even in a world where I'm having sex with 10 other people, I'll also continue to have sex with the one person who I'm having really good sex with, right? So I don't lose out on the continual sexual relationship in any meaningful sense. But moreover, I'll also point out over here that it's not as though every individual person I have sex with will have completely different core skill sets involved in sex, right? Again, there will be certain mechanical bases to sex which are going to be consistent and carried through to improving my sex with everybody, and consequently, everybody else's will also be improving with me if they're having casual sex. So I think it doesn't really matter whether or not you're in a monogamous relationship. Their next claim, STDs are likely to increase because you have sex with more people. I think when you're not treating sex as something special and sacred, you are likelier to ask people for STD screenings because it is normal and mundane enough that you can do so without fear of giving offense to them. So you're actually likely to reduce STDs over here by virtue of the fact that you're able to do investigation without feeling like you're breaking some sort of social barrier. Next claim by then, well, you're going to have a lot more harassment because there are greater incidences of sex, sex actually happening in the first place. A couple of responses. First of all, this doesn't engage with Ittihad Iqbal's analysis, where he points out that just because sex is seen as special by society doesn't mean that in every sexual interaction, both partners see each other as their one special person. In cases where there is an imbalance and one person has bought into the social narrative that this is a really special act I'm having, and the other one thinks, well, no big deal because there's always recalcitrance in society, then you create a power imbalance where harassment and abuse become far likelier. But more importantly, I'll also note that you're able to better identify and call out harassment in a world where sex is normal and anodyne because you are likely to be able to discuss it more openly and actually identify the traits which make up harassers more commonly. The reason this is uniquely important is because harassment is not usually a one-off offense. That is to say, harassers are usually serial harassers. So the ability to identify and call out harassment makes it much less likely that more people will be harassed in future. Therefore, the ability to call out harassment reduces net harassment significantly. Their next claim, well, when you have more sex, you open yourself up to the judgment of more people when you're having sex. I think it's actually the inverse. When everybody is having less sex, they are far more judgmental about every individual person they're having sex with. When everybody's having a lot of sex, they don't have the time to be judgmental about everybody they're having sex with, again, because it's such a normal, common thing that it becomes largely irrelevant. Okay, so that is largely closing government's analysis on why casual sex is harmful dealt with. I think most of those have been taken out. Second, then, opening government. What I want to point out here is that there's a problem in how opening government has conceptualized this debate largely. They think sex is special, and they have proceeded to have their impacts drawn from there without having justified that sex is special in the first place. The reason this is critical is because this applies to all of their arguments about social pleasure, rushing into first times, and things of that sort. Let me explain. Their first claim, well, there's less social pressure because you can just say you're waiting for the right person. When something is normal, you don't have to explain away why you're not doing it, right? It's just a normal thing that you are or aren't doing. It is just a common human thing, completely irrelevant whether or not you're doing it. But more critically, who cares if you have to justify normal activity, right? Why would I feel shame and pressure about having to justify the fact that I'm not having sex if nobody sees sex as special? I won't see sex as special then, and I'm not going to care to see this as something which causes me tense anxiety. Their second claim, if you rush into the first time and you do it badly, then you're not going to have a second time. Again, this is only true if you see sex as something special that you fucked up irrevocably the first time. But in a world where you see sex as normal. You're going to see the same as going to play a game, scraping your knee, and then think, okay, I'll go try again next time, because nothing of consequence was lost, because sex was not special. It was something just so typically normal. Their next claim, you have less sexual harassment, sexual assault. I think to some degree, my response is to close and government deal with this. But furthermore, I'd also note over here, sexual assault is frequently about power and the ability to hurt somebody else and make them feel less than. I think that's something which is seen as special and really deeply personal and intimate and important. In this case, sex, as it's seen in a world where it's special, is something which you are far likelier to abuse than something that is seen as normal. So sexual assault and incidences thereof may increase in a world where it's seen as something through which you can really bully and hurt other people because it's so special. Before I continue, I'll take opening.
Worst case scenario, we didn't achieve special, but we are less exposed to the potential harassment, potential pain, and therefore we avoid the potential harms and consequences which might happen because of optimism bias, reckless decision, and bad choices when you are younger, when you think that everything will be great, and
Okay,
because
thank you.
it's so common.
Yeah, but when you don't discuss sex, you're unable to identify harassment. Harassers get to roam around scot-free, and everybody else gets harassed because of your inability to do anything about it. I already discussed this. Third issue, opening opposition and why we outweigh them, meaningfully speaking. I want to note that OO has done a good job pointing out why you're likely to have more sex and why that sex is likely to get better with time. That's all fair. What we have uniquely pointed out to you, however, is that less attractive people who weren't having much sex in the status quo are likelier to have sex right now. In response to closing government's claim, by the way, like incels are going to get some right now just because everybody has lower standards for who they want to have sex with. So you're just going to have fewer people who aren't having sex in net, right? The consequence of this is that uglier people and people who can't access sex in the status quo are having more sex. Why is this more important than OO's analysis? Because what they're basically proving is that the average person who's already likely to have some amount of sex, probably decent, has even more sex, and it becomes even more enjoyable. What we're proving to you, however, is that people who weren't having sex at all are now able to have sex. So the delta of actual utility being gained by these people is so much greater than the delta of utility being gained by people who are already having sex and are marginally beginning to improve the sort of sex they're having. So that's the number one reason we beat them. But secondly, we also outcompare them on the point of shame, because they claim that they're dealing with shame by getting rid of the shame that you might have as a consequence of like taboos around sex. We point out to you that frequently the shame comes from other associated social standards, such as beauty standards, and how you feel judged because somebody's not having sex with you reinforces the other social standards regarding beauty. We are able to, however, break the shame not just of sex by getting rid of the taboo around sex, but also around being ugly or less good looking, because we've gotten rid of sex as a feedback mechanism into this other social standard. We take this debate because casual sex is not harmful, because sex isn't special enough to worry about things like first times and social pressure, and because ugly people finally get to get some. On all those grounds, extremely proud to oppose.
We thank the speaker for that speech and everyone for the debate. And please shake your hands, say your thank yous, and then leave the room for us to deliberate.
Thanks, guys, for the round.
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Also, I think the recording can stop.